Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Unlocking Venture Capital. I'm Sydney.
I'm Nandita. I'm Sydney's friend. I met her about 5 months ago at Web Summit, and she was my first introduction to venture capital. I graduated from university a year ago, and I actually studied philosophy. So this will be amazing, learning more about venture capital.
So commonly we have conversations where I'm like, why aren't we recording this all the time?
Way
so
too
here
many.
we are.
We're doing it.
Yeah, exactly. So how has your journey been? You've been with a startup and as well as with me.
I have.
And yeah, and so you're now in Vancouver and kind of understanding the scene here in Canada, which I think is your first time seeing what the ecosystem is like here. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. So, yeah, I had a founder friend for some time, but I never really knew anything about startup or like venture capital. And then when I moved to Portugal, to Lisbon, I ended up helping a founder out, just grow their idea, generate revenue, and I kind of gained an understanding of how the space works, at least socially, and then just the mechanisms of beginning something and venture an idea. And then I met you at Web Summit, and I was introduced to the idea of venture capital for the first time. And then I think just through creating the podcast with you, and then also just doing my own reading, a lot of Googling, a lot of courses on Coursera on startup financing, I kind of gained a sense of sort of how the larger space works in the entire ecosystem. And that got me really interested in like the mechanisms of investing and just what it does for the world. And yeah, and since then I've been kind of seeking out opportunities here in Vancouver, but it is a very small space. So I'm kind of learning how things really work beyond just like the knowledge of how they are supposed to.
I think that we have a lot of things out there that's about like demystifying, that's about all of these things that sound very similar. And at the same time, like you also don't, because it is meant to be more of an opaque kind of industry, as it always was since its origins in the 1950s, when it was like founded back in Silicon Valley. Like, how did this work? How did you invest in the first Google? How did you take that kind of a risk? And so, the idea of it is something that is really interesting. One thing that I have found with my friends, especially in the States, where they have such a huge appetite for risk, is they themselves can't wait to be LPs. They can't wait to be investors in different funds, not just their own, especially if they work for like a CVC, for example, a corporate venture capital. So they can't wait to kind of develop their own investment thesis from quite a young age. And that's something that I think is so interesting, because you don't get these opportunities way back then. You don't even get these opportunities like 10, 15 years ago. It's almost like, how would you possibly do that? How are you going to save X amount of portion of your money from doing whatever it is that you do? It doesn't have to be working in venture. It could be working as anything, really. And then what is it that you want to invest in the future, So one thing that I talk about with my other friends, especially those who are in their first few years of venture capital. So I've been in for about 5 years now. And then before that, I was a founder and exited my startup to become a partner. But a lot of people kind of go through it in a much more, different kind of way. And so they're thinking like, okay, well, right now, this is what I invest in because this is what my company's getting me to invest in. But what would I personally want to see happen, and what do I personally would want to like believe in? So if you were to like fast forward, whatever amount of time, it could even be a year. Syndicate funds take really small check sizes, like 1,000, 2,000, 5,000.
Wow, that's really small.
There's really small.
Okay.
So you actually can, if you want to join syndicate instead of like LP, exactly. But it's a great way to learn about investing. Is
interesting.
Literally, you can like save your birthday money. And be like, this is this particular startup in a space that I really believe in, whether it's climate tech, sustainability, whether it's environment, whether it's animals. I'm just naming things that I believe you like.
Like love animals,
saving all these dogs, saving dogs. All these trees, all these things, and just being like, well, this is what I believe in, this is what I think would actually really work, this is how I would analyze it. I want to understand how the person who's leading it would think. I want to have many calls with them, and here's my like few $1,000s of tuition. Well, wouldn't that be a great
it's a great idea. But here's my question: with such a small amount that you're investing, I don't know how a syndicate fund works or exactly what it is, but I'm assuming it's the same structure with some investors investing just a smaller amount of money. How involved would you be?
As involved as you want, and it depends on who's running your syndicate.
Interesting.
So they determine the terms for you. They represent you, right?
Okay.
So in the US as well, not every place, like things like Kickstarters is
Mm-hmm.
a good way to describe what a syndicate is, right?
I see.
You gave something to something that was pretty much at idea stage. And usually it's at idea stage. And they have like a graphics designer like create the website, like all these things for you. And it looks real. And it looks like, okay, this is how I can imagine what the company is going to be. This is how I imagine the product is going to be when it launches.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to give, my little bit of money because that was the minimum. That's what you asked for.
Yeah.
That's the minimum, to be able to invest in this, and then I will get like this product or shares or something, right? In this case, it would be shares.
Yes.
But there has to be actually like a lead for this kind of crowdfunding,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that lead person is what dictates your terms,
Yeah,
right?
sets the terms, right?
Right. So they kind of like a lead investor, but like the leader of your syndicate or your SPV.
Yeah.
They will be the ones that will set whatever it is for you, so you can have these choices to actually go about asking them all these questions preliminarily before, right? There'll be ones that are for specifically diverse founders. There'll be ones that
Yeah.
are specifically for climate or environment, and there are ones specifically for female founders.
Are those mission based?
So those are mission based.
Okay.
If they have yeah, so if these are like the ones I listed, those are pretty much mission based, right? Or impact based, depending on how you're
Impact-based.
seeing it. So
Got it.
usually like DEI focused ones are
Yeah.
mission based. That is part of what they're supposed to be doing. And that is kind of the investors that they also usually kind of attract. So Gay Angels is a big one in the US.
Yes, I remember.
Gay Angels, yes.
Yeah, it's great. As they should.
Right in the name, it is mission based. And
But they have to expand eventually, right? Beyond just they're investing in like queer founders.
That's up to them.
Ah, interesting.
And it's also up to you to ask
Mm-hmm.
as a new member. You kind of see what I mean?
Yeah.
There's lots of ways to be an investor in today's world that didn't exist before.
Mm-hmm.
And what I really like is that younger generations do have these opportunities and can take these kinds of new avenues that I really wish existed before too.
Yeah. Yeah, like you said, it started in the 1950s?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's not super far back.
Nope.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Do the focus-based or the impact-based funds tend to, I guess, face more difficulty fundraising, or is it better because they already have a niche with the LPs that they're seeking?
So there's something called white spaces.
Okay.
So white spaces are underrepresented spaces, right? So what happened in like the 1950s and like going beyond, still happening in young ecosystems like Canada and places in Europe and places like that, is that who is going to actually be in your round? My friends. So whoever looks like me, amazing. Yeah. Whoever went to school with me, so Stanford, Harvard, amazing.
Great.
Right?
Yeah.
And
amazing.
But who do they not ask? All the other people.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And so if you kind of go back to be like, okay, well, do I believe that they will be able to have this market and keep this market? Yeah. Because they were never invited before.
Yeah.
Right? For one reason or another. Or because they weren't asked, simply the opportunity didn't arise, or because originally a lot of deals are made behind closed doors at golf clubs or just at empty
places
mansions.
Of diversity.
Yeah, empty mansions, things like that.
Golf clubs, great.
Yeah, great way. I actually had this like funny conversation with my friend. We should just ride around in golf carts.
Can you play golf?
I do.
Really?
Yeah, because I actually have the perfect height and stature for a golf player.
Is there perfect height and stature?
Is there a perfect height for basketball players?
That's so
Is it
true.
your height?
No, it's definitely not my height. I mean, I'm an average 5'5".
You can't see it right now.
I'm an average 5'5".
If we stood up.
No, but I'm not like 5'1". I'm like 5'5".
I know. But like, there is a...
Okay, there's an ideal stature to optimize your performance in golf. Got it.
I love that because I feel like otherwise it'd be really hard.
Yeah. How did the going around golf courses go?
I didn't go yet. Okay. But there is in New York Tech Week one day where there's like a shuttle and it will take you to that like New York golf course and that's your networking event. What was the most like surprising thing that happened that you have found in terms of this opaque industry?
I mean, it's interesting. I think what I really enjoyed was one of two things. I think just the idea of like innovation forward industry where like you're focusing on bringing things into the world that are useful. I just found to be really exciting. Also, just the pace at which it moves. I was just like, this is probably an industry I want to be a part of. And then also just the mechanisms of investing I find to be really interesting. So that's like actually the finance that I've been like teaching myself and just Googling that I thought was so interesting. So I think with the know-how I've really enjoyed, but I'm realizing as with any industry, the experiential know-how is really the better reflection of how things work. Space is defined by sort of the social reality as well in parallel. So that's been interesting. It's yeah, I mean one thing I noticed is it's not very diverse, but I think that's just the case for a variety of different things. But yeah, I've noticed there's a very strong culture that seems a little, I don't know if transactional is the right sense, but it's very focused on value and the value that you bring to someone and the
Yeah.
value that they can provide to you, which obviously makes sense in an industry where you have to discern whether or not someone could be of benefit for you. But in terms of creating a network, I find that it can be a little sometimes a little empty, a little meaningless. And I think
People in the
for
industry think that too.
yeah, oh my god, thank you. I'm not, it's very rare that I've come across a validation of that thought, but I'm just like, okay, well,
Like, especially if you had to like move your life to work in, a certain industry or a certain company,
yeah,
and like you had nobody around you. So you have
exactly.
to build everything from scratch.
But it's just
But it's all
crazy.
like what are like what relationship are you building?
Yeah, but there's such a, I mean, everyone I've talked to has been like, relationship building is so important, but like, how valuable or great are those relationships when they're underlying sort of this transactional nature? And I'm just like, that's not for an industry that's so meaningful in terms of bringing useful things to the world. The interactions in the industry are quite meaningless.
Mm.
Why? You're missing out on so many amazing people and so many great thinkers. So I guess it's one thing I've kind of noticed as I'm now venturing into venture capital, is do I want to be part of a space where I'm not really resonating with the social reality, but at the same time, I'm so limited because I haven't encountered like even a great
Yeah,
extent of,
you've met two startups thus
yes,
far
two startups, one I was
that you
involved
know
in.
personally.
Yeah, yeah.
So
But also I think
so
hearing,
have a lot more, right?
yeah,
And providing a lot of perspective, and you'll be able to kind of see and judge for yourself, like,
exactly.
is what does this market look like in this space or this space. So I am speaking on behalf of an industry agnostic fund, because our family office fund is industry agnostic, which means we look at every industry, right? And so be able to see the potential of the different industries and the different things, and knowing what you will or won't invest in.
Mhm.
I also don't want to waste a founder's time. When I was a founder, because I was a founder for the other half of the decade, is like you have so many things to do. You have so many things on your plate, right? And so you really only want to be approaching the most like relevant things to you at the time, or you will feel also like you have been kind of tricked. And so every single thing that you're like, if you give me a referral, I might not take it because if it's not mutually beneficial, I would feel like I'm wasting the founder's time. And as a former founder, I would know how horrible that is.
Mm-hmm. No, completely agree. I think in this industry, more than, I mean, everyone's quite busy, so it makes sense. You'd have to be quite selective in who you respond to. So I completely understand that. It's nothing I've been like, oh my god, this person I reached out to for help didn't respond to me. I hate this world. Like I understand that people are busy, and I understand that I'm not really providing, anything other than maybe just offering insight or requesting insight, and guidance, which they don't have to do.
I
So
like how you're offering a request.
no, I rephrased
so
it.
funny.
I realized I said offered, but I meant request.
I
I'm not offering insight. But I have really appreciated the people who have been very honest and open about their experience and vulnerable, and have been able to, even though I'm not offering anything, respond to kind of my call for help. What have been the most rewarding parts of your experience that make you kind of grateful for having entered this field?
Yeah, so I feel like being a former founder, it drives me to be the kind of investor I wish I had when I was a founder. And so all these lessons, all of these things actually got me to do some things that are really unique. So I wrote a book for entrepreneurs during COVID, for example.
Yes, what's it called? Plug
It's
it.
called it's called How to Have a Good Day. It's
Wow.
actually authored by somebody named David Adams, which is a A/B testing name. So that actually tested better than my own name.
Well, yeah, because it's like a white guy name.
It's like a typical American name.
That's so
And then
interesting.
borrow someone's face, it's stock photo. And yeah, and so that sold pretty well during COVID. And it was just really
Amazing.
about like how well, I've been working from home for a long time. My sourdough bread was actually, I taught the entrepreneurship program at Concordia University.
What was that experience like?
Yeah, so teaching entrepreneurship, business 101, marketing 101, those kinds of courses. It was at night. I think it was like twice a week or something. And it was really interesting. So I taught the adult class. It was not the regular undergrad class, right? So this
Mhm.
were like specialized programs where their managers wanted them to learn more about being entrepreneurial in the workplace. So that to me was so interesting. I only saw at that time in my own experiences, being like, this is the structure things always were. Just do it like this, right? And so allowing you to get that kind of creativity, those kinds of innovative thinking back into corporate society, but as well as just providing it for the general public. I feel like that was extremely rewarding to be able to be like, oh, these are the tactics that do work. These are things that I've also tried that don't work.
Yeah, no, I love it's not just like a step by step. It's kind of more so like your thoughts from your experiential knowledge,
Mhm.
which is real knowledge in my opinion, because that's how the world really works.
Yeah.
And these are real people that you will encounter on your journey.
Yeah.
That maybe sometimes they're not really talked about, or those experiences are kind of painted over, glossed over, not recognized. So that's great. What
Yeah.
are some of the experiences you had as a founder that you were like, here's a red flag?
Here's a red flag. Like a few. So
Yeah, I would imagine.
yeah. So for example, like, when I was preparing for pitch decks and pitch competitions and those kinds of things, one of the things that people kept saying was like, oh, just pitch to everybody. And so one of the best things that I did to prepare for my pitch competitions was the tactic that I used for my class. So I was like, okay, you know what, guys, it's only going to be 2 minutes, really, really short. And you get to send me a recording of yourself and we watch it as a class. The reason is you're actually your best teacher.
Yeah.
So some people would do 2 recordings, some people would do 18 recordings, and they would tell me, they're like, we did this 18 times. I'm like, that sounds about right. And so you have to give them specific criteria. So as soon as you see the first one, I'm going to tell you the first 5 seconds of watching your own recording or hearing your own voice is the most amount of education you could possibly get.
Yes, I agree. It's like an objective overview of what you subjectively experience at all points.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, great for anyone and anything.
They all loved it. They all just thought it was so funny and embarrassing to watch themselves. Then we had to give each other feedback. So mandatorily, they have to give one positive and one negative at least.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Mhm.
How was it being a female founder? Because as limited as my experience is, I've met probably one out of like at least a 20
The
that I
two-
met.
yeah, for
No,
sure.
but that I met, not
Okay.
like befriended and developed a relationship with. The one that I met was a little reluctant versus all the others who were kind of a little more like head forward. And I think that's maybe what the environment permits for them.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it was still like very lonely because I was also like a solo founder. I did have
Oh, you
like
were
a
a
CTO.
solo founder.
Yeah, I did have a CTO, but yeah, so I did have quite a lot that I had to figure out kind of on my own, and there wasn't like a lot of people to talk to or relate to.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I walked away from, the funding that I was offered was because they were from people that I didn't feel like reflected my values or
Mm-hmm.
my product. And I felt like there was a lot of, oh, this is so great. You are here, you exist. And then how can we take advantage of this?
Yeah, to seem like you're uplifting a certain kind of person.
Sort of. So it's also like, for example, when I won Best Pitch in Montreal, right next to the stage was this like, I don't know, middle-aged white man
Great.
who offered me to be his unpaid intern, and I beat him.
You're
He's
a
the
great
first
founder.
person to talk to. He's the first person to talk to
You're
me.
better than me. Work for me, and
Yeah.
I'll not pay you.
Yeah, and I will not pay you because I was also like 26 at the time,
Yeah.
and I had like such a baby face, so I probably looked like 19. It's
Yeah.
not great, but it was difficult for other
Yikes.
people to hear your merit.
Or even just like validate it, right? Even
Oh,
if
they
it's
don't need to
there.
they don't validate it now. It's just-
Well, yeah. How is it being a female woman investor at a VC? I know from what I've seen, it's the only women that I've seen in Vancouver have been like operations managers, if at best.
Mhm.
I've not seen a single woman GP in Vancouver from the ones that I've looked at.
Yep, they're hard to find.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Like, I know two.
But that doesn't make any sense to me. Like, why? No.
So I'm the chapter lead for Women in Venture Capital.
What is that
For
exactly?
Women in Venture Capital is a fantastic nonprofit organization. It's a network of about 6,000 women from all around the world, all in VC. And all they have to actively work in VC because you have to use your work email to get into the everything. And so there are several in the Canadian cities. So I do events and like events for networking, events for education. When I go to New York, which I do, I always go to the Women in Venture Capital events. So when you go there, you will also like have this very different feeling that it's not just any kind of event, right? You feel like you are seen through the people that are in front of you, and they reflect the diversity that you wish you had years ago. Well, my first investment that I made from my fund were for two men, okay? One of them was of a diverse background. And of course, like doing your due diligence, they have to show you who like is part of their investment round. The Women's Equity Fund was part of their investment round.
Okay, great.
Of Canada. So I had to like dig a little bit deeper, like who invests in this and why and things like that. So amongst like the biggest people who invest in it are high net worth individuals that were women to want to invest in other women who chose these men.
Yeah.
So I was so curious. I didn't understand like what this title that looked like it was mission driven became something else and why not. So it was explained to me after doing quite a bit of research that a lot of the funding did come from high net worth individuals into the fund, and then the people who made the decisions, like in order to fundraise again, you do have to use up the fund. The biggest risk in Canada for early stage as well is also just that the round might not close, but you have a higher risk for women and people of color, those kinds of founders, for the round to not close. And you get fewer meetings and you ask for less money. You do tend to outperform, but you have to kind of get into that door first. Then what ends up happening is that a big portion of that money from high net worth individuals go to male founders.
Yeah, to generate any kind of return.
Because their round will close. In places of less diversity, like here, because there are fewer players, it's not about this is what we represent, it's this is what we aim to represent.
How do you think that can shift? Because not only do you have to sort of focus on investing in women entrepreneurs, but you also have to make sure that they have the opportunities to become entrepreneurs. So how do you kind of attack that at both ends in a way that also generates the returns that you would expect just focusing on what typically goes now, which is mostly male dominated?
Yeah. So it's a mind frame thing, but it's also a very simple formula. It is time plus painful incidences plus time.
Okay, great. It's a time sandwich.
Yeah. So how do you approach this time sandwich? Just like wait. The same thing that I would talk to some founders who build products for a problem that's not a problem. If it's not a problem for you, how do I make you realize it's a problem for you?
Interesting.
So let's talk about like having people go to resorts and then like get like that kind of chip or that kind of tag in order to make sure they don't lose their laundry, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. But I think one thing that does sort of override that or help that is having investors who share in your identity or your experiences. So when it comes to Woman Fund, you're probably going to be more likely to get investment if the people investing or the managers are women rather than men who would not have any kind of shared identity with you, would not resonate with motivating you, encouraging you. But like you just said, in these smaller ecosystems, if that's already the case, that's still not working because they're still investing in men in male-dominated startups. So I guess beyond shared identity, I think there maybe needs to be more movement on the investment side. I don't know.
So I was I ran a clean and climate tech venture studio fund, okay, and it was very male dominated. All right, and I had the most amount of experience, and so when the question about diversity and team culture and like what you're investing in to be very, very intentional came up, I had somebody above me who was like, our investments are so diverse. They're talking about their one investment. And I was like, but every person of a diverse background has like 5% equity. And all of the white men have like 50%. And they take all the board seats. So no one of diverse background, no female, no person of color, no person who wasn't born in this country, no immigrant ever had a single board seat. They didn't understand why it was a problem because they're like, all why aren't you happy with all these crumbs, damn it? If I brought it up, which I did, I was the problem. Most women, even if they are actually promoted to partner, they can't afford the buy-in. So what the two GPs did is that they did kind of like a loan agreement, which was really interesting because they're like, okay, well, what if you didn't have to give all of this up front? What if we did these kinds of flexible things instead? What if we help like, certain kinds of fundraising? So also the other thing is that like, you're going to love this part.
What?
If there are some agreements in the US, I've never seen it in Canada, where, you will get a salary or you will have a lesser buy-in if you're the one who brings in certain LPs into the fund. So what if you're like, okay, great, I'm going to bring in like my frat bros from Stanford.
Yeah, so that's already another barrier then. It's the same. What difference does that make? Buy-in versus buy-in with LPs. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. So so it makes sense to the fund. Yes.
But that's just giving them a different same option.
What? That's correct.
Why can't they just have like a diverse amount of partners, however limited they may be in number, and then just proportionally charge them? I guess that's a little too radical.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's a little too radical. So tell me about tipping culture. So this is a topic that it's
a good segue, by the way.
For me to bring up,
it's a great segue.
That's a great segue.
Yeah. So, what did you buy today?
I bought a coffee.
And did you tip?
I did.
Okay, so we were in Canada, just so you know.
Yes.
So you tipped for something you took to go.
Yeah.
So I mean, I used to be a server when I was a student. So back in the day, not the best environment, I would say, for me.
Well, you were in a restaurant.
Yeah, I was a terrible server as well. Yeah.
But there's a tipping culture there, right?
Yeah, so there's definitely a tipping culture there. So there are some ways to do it where you're like pool your tips and everything else. Yeah. But where it really came from, and you know that because you lived in Europe, yes. Is there a tipping culture there?
No.
Exactly. Why?
Well, because it's expected that they're paid by the organizations that are hiring them.
That's so weird. So I had a friend. Is actually a friend that I stayed with. Eric, he's amazing.
Hey, Eric. I don't know you, but yeah. Hello.
So we used to work at WebMD together. And
cool.
One of the first things I learned about Eric was not only that he was from New York, like born and raised, true New Yorker, but he actually worked in the WebMD building when he was like 19 as a dishwasher in Midtown Manhattan for $1.45 an hour. And then that was actually one of the first things he said at his WebMD interview. And I was like, how is this possible? And my heart just like sank, right? So he was allowed to have shared tips with the waiters in that scenario, but it's only because that's the law. So there are lots and lots of professions that even though they are paid a living wage and even though they are not scrutinized by this particular law for service, which is very heavy on restaurants, very heavy on these things, right? There are other services that I'm sure you can name when you go to other countries like Europe or Asia, continents, like Europe or Asia. The people who have been so used to tipping their entire lives would be people like Eric, because it was always seen as, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do, right? Yes. But this is what you're supposed to do when you have like a poor employer who doesn't pay you enough for you to have a living wage.
Well, yeah. Then tips are just a way to displace an unlivable wage and justify it.
And it's justified. That's the whole problem. And the
responsibility is on the consumer, not on the organizer who's employing you, who should be paying you a fair, livable wage.
Yeah. So in Montreal, where I live, right, it was notorious. This happened all the time. There will be waitresses like yelling at specifically like French families because they're in French, as they are not tipping them, right? Because they are not used to that. And they're like, why doesn't your boss just pay you like normal?
Yeah. But I think that's the case that I'm learning with a lot of different systems and industries is people don't critically think about why things are the way that they are, and they just accept them. Like they're typically pretty exploitative in nature or disadvantaged people.
Yeah, immigration, healthcare, all the things that we actually need in life.
These are horrible systems that are failing people. And you need to critically think about things, not just as like an independent thinker for yourself, but for other people. Because at the end of the day, we're a society. supposed to have a duty, I guess. You could say we have some kind of a moral duty to make sure that we're all taken care of.
And I want servers to be taken care of, but I don't want them to have to like argue with like French tourists on a daily basis. That's so horrible.
But it's not your responsibility to take care of them by paying their wage. It's to make sure that systems are in place that pay them fairly.
But they're not protected because these laws are very, very strong. They've been around for quite a long time.
Yeah, it's a crazy world we're living in.
So you should definitely like think and consider these things every time you leave this country, of course, and every time you kind of come back, you kind of have that realization all over again. At least I do when I'm like, oh yeah, people are doing this here, and oh yeah, things are like that here, and oh yeah, this is not weird.
Yeah. No, I agree, but I think that's also why voice is so important and putting your voice out there. And if it's the scariest thing, I mean, there's a reason I'm like constantly posting on LinkedIn about my experiences that aren't necessarily like job offers or like amazing things that happened to me. They're rather just like lessons that I learned through my experiences because I think they're so full of meaning. And I think those are the things that are important to platform. Otherwise, these things are being swept under the rug. And it's your voice, really, especially from an underrepresented background, which I think both of us fall into. It's unfortunate that it's our responsibility to bring attention to them, but I think it's something that just has to be done.
I truly believe in the power of young people, and I also believe in borderless talent. I partner with co-ops, like programs in school and different programs like that all around the world because I believe that people should be given experiences and given transferable skills to do great things.
Who have been some people that have inspired you?
Yeah. Like I just read this article about when Serena Williams was very young and her sister didn't have a lot of people to look up to that looked like them at the time. Like they interviewed her when she was like 10 years old and her sister was like 11. And so they're like, who are your role models? And she goes, myself.
I love that. That's so great.
I truly believe that like it's not actually investors who create something to change the world. It's founders. And hopefully I would get the chance to work with more great ones who are changing things in such a big way, right?
What do you think about sort of all that you've experienced in New York? How are your thoughts about sort of like the industry there, how it differs here?
I thought it was better and kinder than I could have ever expected.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. That's where people are more helpful?
Yes.
Was it? Okay. Why do you think that is?
Because there are more opportunities.
Okay, so it's not like you have to hold on to like whatever you have.
It's not the mentality of scarcity in the same way because there are more opportunities.
It's been very helpful seeing your journey and also just getting your insight to kind of navigate whether it is even something that I want to kind of continue going into. I hope in a couple years time, I'm really happy with where I found myself. It'll be the people who've helped me along the way that will have gotten me there, who I will always appreciate.
We should get benches named after us.
I will dedicate a bench to you.
Okay. Good. Well, thank you for joining us on another episode of Unlocking Venture Capital. I'm Sydney.
I'm Nandita. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what else comes out from this podcast.